As always, there's Valentine under the desk. Today we actually have a lot of books to cover, and I'm going to be sharing a lot of personal information. So this is going to be a long video, but I think it's going to be probably the best video in terms of content that's pretty important. And the title of today's video, obviously, is Science and Therapy. And before I start, I might say a couple words about therapy because I've gone through therapy and I'll be getting into that a little bit. And I think everybody should be have a little bit of that one way or another. Anyway, Revolution in Mind: The Creation of Psychoanalysis by George McCarry. Now, in addition to my Rosicrucian stuff and the self-help stuff that I've read and whatever, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. Um, but obviously there's only so much you can have. But this book really it gives an excellent overview of the whole area of the beginning of psychotherapy, or what did it say? Psychoanalysis, the creation of psychoanalysis. And just is like amazing. George McCarry's Revolution in Mind is the best informed history of psychoanalysis. Freud's context is more fully elaborated by McCarry than ever before. I admire in particular the sanity and balance of this work, since it shows that Freud's value transcends his scientism. George McCarry has written nothing less than a history of the modern mind. With an astounding breadth of knowledge and an unprecedented gift for synthesis, he takes his reader on a European journey that begins in the late 19th century and ends in the cataclysm of the Second World War. The Revolution in Mind is also a tragedy. It is the moving story of what we lost when the old world went up in flames. Now, before I actually mention about this, the next book is also by George McCarry. Soul Machine: The Invention of the Modern Mind. Let's see what this has. We read about this here. Soul Machine: An enlightening and gracefully written account of a vital aspect of our history that few of us are aware of: the replacement of the soul by the mind and the struggle to understand its foundations in the brain. In this sweeping, authoritative, and lively account, George McCarry chronicles the emergence of the modern mind as an appealing yet unstable object of scientific inquiry, and shows why the long-standing goal of establishing boundaries between it and the brain and even the soul has proven so elusive, illuminating, and highly engaging. So, between these two books, we have the entire history of modern society and the conflict it has as it struggles to understand what awareness is, and it struggles to understand what the soul is, and whether the soul exists or not or whatever. And the point that I'm making, other than that these two books together, they just are a beautiful summarization of where we're at. Uh, they openly share that there is no consensus. All these people today who say there's no such thing as the supernatural, there's no such thing as the soul, there's no such that awareness is purely a physical thing, and that it ends with the death of the physical body. That's openly disputed by half of the community, the scientific community. But today we're being kind of for they try to force us to believe that uh, there is no soul or astral bodies or whatever you want to call it. But these books pretty much prove that that is openly up for uh, debate. And obviously, I've already said where I come down on and my personal experiences with supernatural uh, and spiritual and occult experiences that are very, there's no question in my mind. Now, nothing but motion is I've have my own understanding over the years. I've come to an understanding of science that gets me by. I mean, I'm obviously not into the real deep stuff. However, I went to Votech school for 2 years to be an electrician for learning electronics theory. And I went to college. I had college physics. So I have kind of a background in some of that stuff. But fundamentally, I really took up this work of uh, Dewey Larson. And Dewey Larson came out with the unified field theory, the reciprocal field theory, which was actually uh, taught in a few universities for a little while, but ultimately it was considered not substantial enough because they didn't have complaints against it other than it being kind of incomplete, if that makes sense. But the thing that I really like about it is that it was multidisciplinary. Multidiscipline, meaning it came up with a paradigm that lent itself to spirituality, to religion, to metaphysical, to occult practices, to all kinds. So it had a way of explaining itself. Now I'm just going to go over the contents here. What he basically said was everything was literally created from the photon and its reciprocal, like electricity, and that there's two reciprocal universes that are joined together by the speed of light. One is the space-time universe, which is three-dimensional physical reality with time being linear, and the other was its reciprocal time-space, in which time was three-dimensional and space was linear, if you will. But anyway, here we go. A universe of motion, reference systems, radiation, gravitation, the reciprocal relation, high speed motion, motion in time, rotational combinations, atoms, subatomic particles, basic mathematical relations, physical constants, cosmic elements, cosmic ray decay, cosmic atom building, some speculation, simple compounds, complex compounds, chain compounds, ring compounds, all derived from vibrational energy. And he had a second book out, The Neglected Facts of Science, that went even further. I'll just go over the contents here. The fundamentals, multidimensional motion, distinctive properties, speed limits. I guess you can't tell much from this. But what I'm saying is the Oak system that I've come up with basically takes hook, line, and sinker. It takes all of Dewey Larson and his concepts because they work very nicely into a metaphysical and occult framework where, for example, space-time is physical reality as we understand it, and time-space is the astral plane. That's just and where in the physical universe, objects gravitate together, and in the astral world or the time-space world, events gravitate together. It's just kind of a simple way of looking at that. But anyway, moving on. Compilers, principles, techniques, and tools. And a lot of people don't understand what a compiler is. Compilers and computers, they go together, but the reason that this book is so fascinating is because in the world of computers, compilers are an important thing. For example, and I'm just going to kind of say, you have computer code and you have compilers. Computer code is written, and then that computer code goes into the compilers, and the compilers produce the result. They produce the manifestation. And in a very real way, this is metaphysical because males who are intrinsically, naturally connected to source, to the light, and are inclined toward head tripping, are producing computer code, what is essentially computer code. And females, which are intrinsically earth-based, are compilers. And what happens is the females take in computer code, and they produce results. And one needs the other. So the reason that I have this as an important thing is how unique it is that men and women are totally different. They're totally different ones, and you can use the example of computer code and compilers to beautifully illustrate the interreaction between them. Now, this is the David Viscott, the Viscott method. Now we're going from science into therapy, and so I have to tell a little bit of my story. When I was growing up, I was in a very religious family, and we were very poor, but very strict. And anyway, shortly after I had graduated from high school, I was still living at home, and I was driving to Votech school every day. But I fell in love with a girl. And it was very deep and very profound. However, my family is very dysfunctional. And what happened was there was three things that happened where I had a nervous breakdown. One of the things was I was studying my Rosicrucian monographs and being exposed to two concepts that totally were shaking the foundations of my world. One was the concept of reincarnation and karma, and the other was the concept of the Christ Spirit or the Master within that speaks through the still small voice of conscience in a person's heart, as opposed to the external authority of the Bible or the church or any external authority. And they were exposed to the concept that, hey, what you need to do is follow your conscience, not what the Bible says or not what this. So it was really it was threatening to the whole family situation. And the third thing that really led to the crisis and a nervous breakdown was my mom had secretly been in several affairs uh, during her life that never really were openly known about until one time she was in a car accident in Duluth, which was several hundred miles away, with the person she'd run off with for a day or two or whatever it was. And it all came out in the open. And it was just, it's like, okay, I was raised in this strict religious thing, this strict how you had to be that way, and there was this corruption or this whole thing in my family, and I just couldn't cope with it. It's I froze. My mind froze. I remember being in the basement, laying on the floor, staring at the ceiling, being forced to make a choice because it's like whichever choice I made, I was either going to go to hell or not. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it was a soul choice. And what I ended up doing was going with the Rosicrucians, and it completely severed my tie with my emotional self. Because my emotional self was just too in pain. And I basically renounced the physical world, and I started on a spiritual journey that was prayer, meditation, seeking God, seeking light, that tied very beautifully in with the Rosicrucian teachings. And I have to say that during that time of instability, the Rosicrucian teachings were the stability that saved me because they were a constant. And those monographs went on for 22 years, weekly monographs. And they really helped me to kind of keep my shit together in a healthy way. So literally what happened in psychological terms is I created a secondary personality that was healthy. And it might not have been too emotional. It might not have gone too deep into emotions, but as it stood, there was nothing really harmful about it. And I was going toward the light, if you will. The Viscott method talks about therapy. Now, because what happens is 20 years later or 30 years later, whatever it was, back in 1991, I was married, I was in the Air Force, and we were living in Phoenix, Arizona. We had, at that time, four children, and we got a divorce. The marriage just blew apart. Well, it was not going too good, but what happened was I was going to there's a Rosicrucian Lodge in Phoenix. I was really getting a lot out of that. I was continuing my meditation, my prayer type of thing. And it happened. I crossed the great abyss in full awareness. At first, it was just little bits at a time. Later, it became permanent. And I merged with Source. And I was able to stay there. And what was happening, it was such a powerful experience. And so uh, electric, if you will, I was getting insights after insights after insights. And what happens typically when a person crosses the great abyss, it's also what they're called is a magister templi, or a master of the temple, but also master of sorrows, because what happens is your earth connection's broken, and all of a sudden you're kind of like up in your head, you're way out into space, and everything's falling apart around you because you don't even care about it. And that's what was going on with me. So the end result, the marriage collapsed. My wife took the kids back to Kansas with her, and I was basically abandoned in Phoenix. And it was a terrible time. But what was interesting was I had another, you could say, psychotic break. But what happened was it was a positive thing in that I was connected to my past. I was able to reconnect to my emotional self. So ultimately, that connection with Source, that power, that energy that I was experiencing was taking me back. And what I wanted to do, it was, I wanted to get back to Earth because I realized, hey, there's nothing out here. It's just light or whatever. I got to get back to Earth. And as that emotional self started to wake up, I was still, that part of me was still a 19-year-old, because that had never grown. It had not grown for all those missing years, and it had to keep up. In fact, that was so disturbing, if you will. I even wrote a letter to my old girlfriend that broke my heart originally. It didn't do any. I mean, it was. She didn't even answer back, whatever. But as like the desperation that I was at, floundering around with all these emotions that I had denied for 20 some years and trying to struggle with. But on the other hand, I had made that breakthrough. After the wife left, I started going to therapy. I started doing this Viscott method, is where you'd actually go through a bunch of things. Let's read it. But far too often, self doubt can keep you from experiencing a joyful, fulfilling life. In this revolutionary guide to self analysis, Dr. David Viscott reveals the caring techniques he uses in his private practice. Dr. Viscott's unique method can help you to shorten the therapeutic process and resolve your emotional conflicts. Among the questions you'll ask yourself: what were the forces that shaped you? How honest are you? How can you deal with guilt, depression, and anger? What do your voice and speech patterns reveal about you? With clarity, compassion, and insight, the Viscott method leads you to a fresh understanding of yourself and shows you how to reach a new level of happiness. Now, in your own home, without the expense of a therapist, you can begin the special healing process. And they would do things like, I would read, there would be certain questions that the book would ask, and I was I was supposed to record myself as I was answering. And then later I would go back and I would listen to where my voice cracked or where I hesitated or where I actually fudged and didn't tell I wasn't honest in my answer, completely honest. That was very powerful. But at the same time, I had discovered the oak energy ball meditation and what was happening was I was starting to connect the chakra centers, the energy centers, uh, with that energy ball. And the first time through that I went through took about 2 months because I was going slow, and it was healing and releasing things in an incredible way, and it was powered by that source connection. Because what happened was that energy ball, as I brought down the light from source, it attracted any black shit like magic. It just attracted anything in it, and then I could lift it back up and get rid of it. So anyway, I was really trying to dig into myself to find out why I was so messed up. And the process was so volatile and so violent that I decided to go to a therapist and check in once a week just to kind of let her keep an eye on me because I was making gains so rapidly. I was also going to support groups. And after I had made that first initial channel with the energy ball from the top of my head down through my spine to the feet, to the core of the earth, I also started working with sexual energy, tantric energy, like Mantak Chia talks about, where basically you learn about orgasm, you learn about edging, you learn about uh, sperm retention for males, all of these things, and I had a spontaneous Kundalini explosion one time. It was shortly after I'd kind of practiced generating some energy, and I was doing a little bit of yoga, and I was bending sideways, standing up, bending sideways, and all that energy that was in my pelvis suddenly shot up through the top of my head like a lightning bolt, like an explosion, and I temporarily blacked out. My knees sagged, but I caught myself before I actually hit the floor. That's how powerful that was. That's how these forces that I was struggling with were going through and that I was trying to deal with. So I'll get back to this later because that's part of it. But now I'm going to just jump to The Ego on Its Own by Max Stirner. Max Stirner wrote in the 1840s, and he actually invented the philosophy of anarchistic individualism, or individualistic anarchy, however you want to say it, which is basically about how important a strong ego is. And this is a very tough book to read, but it's very, very foundational. And when you get into mental health, and that's what we're talking about here, mental health and therapy, One of the biggest problems is people their concept of themselves is not strong enough. They think badly of themselves. They don't have a healthy sense of self. They don't have a healthy ego strength. And when you talk about having an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, both whispering in your ear, it's only the ego that holds you together. And that's the job. And in our world, the one thing that external authority, whether it's government, whether it's the church, whether it's a family member, whatever it is, the one thing that people fear is that you are your own master, that you're your own person. Every external authority out there has one great fear, which is that you will not listen to them, that you will not comply, that you will not buckle down. And this book is the one where it tells how important that really is. That's what that gets at. Okay, now going back to my volatile time in Phoenix. When I was going through all this, I also started reading Dianetics and going through book one processing. So I was not only doing therapy, but also going through book one processing. Book one processing is basically where you go to a person and they sit there and they listen to you, they monitor you, and they go back to a moment in time on the timeline, back to a moment of pain that you remember. So it's very much similar to Freud's free association, except that it aims itself towards instances of pain. And you go back and you relate these memories and you relate them over and over again, and you try to dig into them and release every bit of emotion from them. And what happens is, as you relive and release and talk about and go over and over this concept, these instances, the pain, the energy that's trapped in them, they call that engrams. Every time that's released, you have more free energy for personal health. And there's a definite sequence of what happens. As you release that trapped energy, you can go through pain, anger, you can go through grief, and you can go through happiness, because it just feels good to get rid of that stuff. Okay, so it's an actual science that they have that's very similar, and I feel derived from Freud's stuff. Now this book, The Science of Survival, is really an interesting thing. And I'll just read this back here. It doesn't have much to do with it, but let's say that men have lived to conquer all other forms of life, from the mastodon to the microbe. Men have lived to build walls and roads and pyramids which have defied the elements for thousands of years. Men have lived to write music which has pleased the gods and lines which have made the angels sigh and the devil weep. This is a time for man to succeed again. Here's the word, the technology, the goal. The job is cut out, and its name is survive. Well, there's a chart. This is it kind of has a chart of human and Dianetic processing, part 2. There's actually different parts on it here. But what's interesting is they have different, the handling of truth, the courage level, all these things, and it goes from a high level to the lowest level. And what it shows is you can determine what level a person's at by their actions. Let's use the ethics or the handling of truth. High concept of truth is the highest. Truthful. Caution of asserting truth. Social lies. Insincere, careless of facts. Truth twisted to suit antagonism. Blatant and destructive lying. Ingenuous and vicious perversions of truth. Covers lying artfully. Details facts with no concept of their reality or no reaction. Let's try another one here. Ethics. Bases ethics on reason, very high ethic level. Heeds ethics of group, but refines them higher as reason demands. Follows ethics in which trained as honestly as possible, moral. Treats ethics insincerely, but not particularly honest or dishonest. Chronically and bluntly dishonest, and when occasion arises at this level and below, authoritarianism, criminals, immoral, actively dishonest, destructive of any and all ethics. Sex criminals, negative ethics, deviously dishonest, perverts honesty without reason, non-existent, non-thinking, obeying anyone. Try another one here. Command over environment. High self-mastery, aggressive toward environment, dislike to control people, high reasoning, volatile emotions. Reasons well. Good control, accepts ownership, emotion-free, liberal. Controls bodily functions, reasons well, free emotion, still inhibited, allows rights to others, democratic, in control of functions and some reasoning powers, does not desire ownership of much, antagonistic and destructive to self, others, and environment, desires command in order to injure, smashes or destroys other or environment, failing may destroy self, fascistic, no control of reason or emotions, but apparent organic control. Uses sly means of controlling others, especially hypnotism. Communistic. Barest functional control of self only. No control of reason or emotions. No command of self, environment, other persons. Suicide. And I'll go with this last one. Sexual behavior or attitude towards children. Sexual interest high, but often sublimated to creative thought. Intense interest in children. High interest in opposite sex. Constancy. Love of children. Interest in procreation. Interest in children. Disinterest in procreation. Vague tolerance of children. Disgust for sex. Revulsion. Nagging of, nervousness about children, rape, sex as punishment, brutal treatment of children, promiscuity, perversion, sadism, irregular practices, use of children for sadistic purposes, impotency, anxiety, possible efforts to procreate, anxiety about children, no effort to procreate, cellular efforts to procreate reported by physiologists. Now, what's scary is when you start looking at these things and all the columns, and there's columns on both sides of this huge chart, on the back side too. Our society shows up at the bottom half. Our society is sick. And this comes straight out and says it. That's why I'm sharing this book. This book, interesting enough, Ishtar Rising, Robert Anton Wilson. Robert Anton Wilson is really kind of a interesting character that really kind of messed with your mind a little bit, but this particular book really had some interesting things. And there was two things of kind of interest that come out, even though there's a lot that I'm not talking about. But one is he maintained, and he had a very good argument, that human beings were genetically created to have sex for pleasure as a social enticement to keep the males and females, to keep the males from running off, to keep as a group instead of animals. And he claimed that that's why genetically the breasts in a female, as opposed to the breasts in any other animal, had such a beautiful shape and were so attractive and placed in such a location. And also why, unlike other animals, women were able to conceive not during their periods or menses, but during the ovulation period. Anyway, the whole argument, and he had a very good argument in this, among other things, was that this was deliberate by nature to keep men around women. So that, and the true role that sexuality really had for civilization, if you will. Another offshoot or interesting point that he had to make was that a lot of married couples, they kind of shorted each other out, and they didn't reach the heights of creativity. And he said that deviant sexuality was really where a lot of the creativity came from in today's world, and gave an interesting argument for that. But I'm not really going to go into that. The Wise Wound, Myths, Realities, and Meanings of Menstruation. Very powerful, very famous book. A classic. Talking about basically a classic in England since it was first published in 1978. The Wise Wound is a profound and provocative addition to the Library of Women's Studies. In this landmark book, Penelope Shuttle and Peter Redgrove explore the fascinating historical and cultural physiology and anthropology that reestablishes its importance in every aspect of our society and our lives. They show how menstruation's powerful images have surfaced repeatedly in myth and ritual, poetry and literature, even popular novels and films, in spite of the attempts of the patriarchal traditions of the ancient colleges of Hera to the contemporary women's movement. From the 17th century witch hunts to modern-day vampire movies, from the sacred hysteria of debauchants to PMS, The Wise Wound explains how fear and ignorance have turned a blessing into a curse, and how menstruation may in fact be the prime motivating evolution of life itself, and how by understanding and appreciating the menstrual process you can reclaim this ancient birthright to empower your own life. Basically, talking about a healthy attitude toward sexuality. That brings up something that I'm just going to talk about the duality of male and female and how they're not the same and how they're actually opposites, like the compiler thing that I talked about. But an interesting a way of thinking of it is the biceps and the triceps. The biceps move the arm one way. The triceps move the arm the opposite way. One cannot dominate the other. One cannot be the other. One has to fully work one way. The other has to fully work oppositional to it, because together, and it's only together when they work together, that things can get done in an intelligent way. So fundamentally, the whole mystery schools, the whole secrets, metaphysics, occultism, psychology, and everything really totally deals with relationships, love relationships, sexuality, and that. And with that, we're talking about Wilhelm Reich, the discovery of the orgone, the function of the orgasm. This book summarizes Wilhelm Reich's medical and scientific work with the human organism over a period of 20 years, and it presents the whole development of this work in its rapid progression from the realm of psychology into that of biology. The discovery of the orgone was the result of a consistent clinical investigation of the concept of psychic energy, at first in the realm of psychiatry. Experience has shown beyond any doubt that the knowledge of the emotional functions of the biological energy is indispensable for the understanding of its physiological and physical functions. The biological emotions which govern the psychic processes are in themselves the immediate expression of a strictly physical energy, the cosmic orgone. And one last book, Wilhelm Reich again, An Introduction to Orgonomy. This anthology is not intended to replace any of the works of Wilhelm Reich, but rather to serve as an introduction to the orgasm, to them. The chapters include material from the function of the orgasm, the cancer biopathy, character analysis, ether, God and the devil, cosmic superimposition, and the murder of Christ. In addition, the volume reprints many important later articles from various journals. True science, faithful to life and incapable by its nature of serving any purpose other than the affirmation of life, began with the monumental discovery of cosmic life energy by Wilhelm Reich. Respectable men of moral science and letters will at least have to admit, after reading this book, the seriousness of Reich's challenge. Okay, that's all these books. Now this is what I've got to say, because we're going back to my breakdown, my nervous breakdowns, my crossing the great abyss. Mantak Chia talked about deliberate cultivating sexual energy, edging, semen retention, and I started to practice with that after I had first been working with energy ball meditation. And what I found what I found happened was that if you consciously generate sexual orgasm energy twice a day, you rupture the astral planes. Absolutely rupture the astral planes, especially if you do that twice a day within, say, 3 hours of each other. And that was really what was propelling my healing. It's really what was propelling my growth. It was blasting through the engrams from the bottom up instead of going through that long sequence of reciting and going back to memories and everything. It was rupturing. It was just blasting through those buried instances of pain in an explosive way. And it was also bringing me into all kinds of conflicts, astral battles, things like that. And here's what I began to understand, that it was a purely mechanical process based upon energy generation and the rupturing of the astral planes, along with some type of meditation that circulated that released energy in a safe way. And I practiced that daily for 7 years. And that adventure led to soulmate cycles. It led to the creation of energy bodies, the development of each chakra, the development of each astral body, one sequentially after the other from the top down. And incredible healing things that happened, and incredibly fast, even though it took years, because there was so much shit, so much wounds that I was going through. And that's where I'm going to leave this, is that was really the secret. But that process of rupturing the astral planes it could also be going to the gym, running till you get that second wind, studying until you break through that barrier, and it's rupturing, and then at night it resets itself. But it's the daily practice of those things that really brings it out, and it's being a purely mechanical process. You can literally throw away all these books. They don't mean anything. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this and it was informative. Thank you.